The morning mist clings to the forest floor like the breath of sleeping spirits. Here, at the northwestern base of Mount Fuji, stretches a sea of green that has swallowed countless souls and secrets. This is Aokigahara, the sea of trees, a place where compasses spin wildly and GPS signals fade to whispers. Formed over 1,000 years ago from the hardened lava of Mount Fuji's last great eruption, this forest grows on a foundation of volcanic rock, so dense that sound itself seems to die among the twisted roots. The trees grow so thick that even at midday, the light filters through in sickly green streams, creating a perpetual twilight that plays tricks on the mind. The Japanese have many names for this place: Aokigahara, Jukai. But there is another name, spoken in hushed tones by those who know its darker reputation: Jizatsu no Mori, the suicide forest. For centuries, this place has drawn those seeking to disappear forever. But according to local legend, not all who enter find the peace they seek. The Shinto belief teaches that those who die in great emotional turmoil become eerie, restless spirits trapped between worlds. In Aokigahara, where so many have met their end in despair, locals whisper that the very air thrums with spiritual energy. The forest doesn't just hide bodies. It collects souls. From Kyoto's haunted temples to Nara's ghostly legends, Japan's supernatural landscape is rich with mystery. But nowhere does the veil between our world and the next grow thinner than in these silent woods. Step carefully. In Aokigahara, even the trees have eyes. Before we venture deeper into this forest's dark secrets, I have a small request. If you enjoy exploring the mysteries of the world with me, please leave a like and a comment. It helps this journey reach even more curious minds. Long before Aokigahara became known for modern tragedies, it harbored an ancient shame. In the harsh winters of feudal Japan, when famine gripped the land like a skeletal hand, desperate families practiced a ritual that would stain their souls forever: ubasute, the abandonment of the elderly. When rice stores ran empty and children's ribs began to show through their skin, village elders would make an unthinkable choice. The old ones, deemed too frail to survive and too weak to contribute, would be carried deep into remote mountains or forests. There, they would be left with perhaps a bowl of water and a prayer to die alone under the stars. Aokigahara, with its labyrinthine paths and sound-swallowing canopy, became one such place of abandonment. Historical records from the Edo period speak of a particular woman, a grandmother from a village near the forest's edge. Her name has been lost to time, but her story lives on in the whispered warnings passed from generation to generation. During the terrible winter of 1783, when Mount Azuma's volcanic ash poisoned crops across central Japan, this woman's family faced starvation. Her son, tears freezing on his cheeks, carried her into Aokigahara on his back. She did not weep. She did not beg. But as he prepared to leave her beneath the twisted branches of a camphor tree, she spoke words that would echo through centuries. "My body will feed these roots, but my spirit will remain. Every step you take away from me, I will remember. Every child who laughs while I lie here forgotten, I will find them in their dreams. This forest will become a hunting ground for souls like mine, and none who enter with darkness in their hearts will leave unchanged." Her son fled, but 3 days later, villagers found him wandering the forest's edge. His hair turned white as winter frost. He spoke of an old woman who followed him through the trees, always just beyond the reach of sight, always calling his name in a voice like wind through dry bones. The legend grew with each telling. Travelers reported glimpsing an elderly woman in tattered robes, her hair hanging long and white as moonlight. She would appear at the corner of their vision, beckoning them deeper into the forest with hands like gnarled branches. Those who followed her were never seen again. A merchant's diary from 1847 describes his encounter. "The old woman smiled at me with teeth like broken stones. She pointed deeper into the trees and I felt compelled to follow. Only when my horse refused to continue did I break from her spell. Looking back, I saw nothing but shadows. But I could feel her eyes upon me as I rode away, and her laughter followed me all the way home. Forest workers began to speak of finding offerings left at the bases of certain trees' small bowls, folded paper cranes, rice cakes gone moldy in the damp air. These gifts, they claimed, appeared overnight in places where no human paths led. The locals knew better than to disturb them. Such offerings were not for the living. Even today, park rangers occasionally report finding makeshift shrines deep in the forest stones arranged in careful patterns, strips of cloth tied to branches, all in places where the official trails fear to tread. Some say these are left by modern visitors seeking to appease the angry spirits of the abandoned elderly. Others believe the shrines appear on their own, manifestations of guilt that spans generations. The curse of ubasute runs deeper than individual tragedy. It speaks to a collective shame, a wound in the cultural soul that never properly healed. And in Aokigahara, where the boundary between past and present grows thin as morning mist, some say the old woman still walks, still searches for the children who forgot their elders, still calls to the lost with promises of rest that lead only to deeper darkness. Listen carefully as you walk these paths. If you hear the shuffle of ancient feet on fallen leaves, if you catch the scent of incense where no shrine should be, remember the grandmother's curse. Remember that in this forest, abandonment has a name, and it calls to the abandoned still. March 15th, 2019. The last entry in Kenji Yamamoto's hiking journal reads, "The blue ribbons are working. I can find my way back as long as I follow them." But something is following the ribbons too. Kenji was an experienced hiker, a 34-year-old software engineer from Tokyo who had explored mountain trails across Japan. His meticulous nature served him well in both coding and climbing. He always carried backup supplies, emergency beacons, and most importantly, a roll of bright blue surveyor's ribbon to mark his path through unfamiliar terrain. His plan was simple: a 3-day solo expedition into Aokigahara's interior, following game trails and deer paths to photograph the forest's hidden landscapes. He'd done similar trips before, always returning with stunning images and stories of peaceful solitude. His girlfriend Yuki knew his routine: check in by satellite phone each evening, return to civilization no later than the 4th day. The first night's call came through clearly. "The forest is incredible," Kenji reported. "So quiet you can hear your own heartbeat." I'm camped near a small clearing, maybe 2 kilometers from the main trail. The blue ribbons are bright against all this green. I've used about 50 meters so far. Day 2, static-filled transmission, voice distant. Strange acoustics in here. My voice echoes even in open spaces. Found some interesting formations trees, growing in perfect spirals. Rocks stacked in ways that seem too deliberate for nature. Still following my ribbons out, marking new paths deeper. Weather holding steady. Day 3, no call. Day 4, search teams mobilized. Park Ranger Hiroshi Tanaka led the search party. A 20-year veteran of Aokigahara rescues, he'd seen everything from simple orientation mistakes to more tragic discoveries. But Kenji's case puzzled him from the start. "We found his trail easily enough," Ranger Tanaka later reported. The blue ribbons were tied exactly as he described. Every 20 meters, bright synthetic material that stood out clearly against the natural colors. We followed them for nearly 3 kilometers into sections of forest where few people venture. The ribbons led the search team through increasingly dense vegetation, around massive trees whose trunks required 5 people holding hands to encircle, past clearings where no grass grew, and the ground felt hollow underfoot. Kenji's path showed careful planning. He avoided steep ravines, marked alternate routes around obstacles, left clear signs of his passage. Then, abruptly, the ribbons stopped. Not torn away by wind or animals, not forgotten in haste. Simply ... absent. There was ribbon tied to a maple tree, Major Tanaka continued. Standard knot, tight and secure. 20 meters deeper, nothing. 40 meters, nothing. We searched in expanding circles for hours. It was as if Kenji had simply vanished into thin air at that exact spot. But the search team discovered something else. The ground around that final maple tree was disturbed, not by human feet, but as if the earth itself had been turned and churned. Kenji's boot prints, clear in the soft soil up to that point, became confused, overlapped with impressions that looked almost human, but somehow wrong. Too long, too narrow. As if someone or something with impossibly elongated feet had danced around that tree while Kenji stood watching. 3 days later, searchers found Kenji's abandoned campsite, but not where his ribbon trail suggested it should be. The tent was pitched in a grove nearly a kilometer off his marked path, surrounded by dozens of blue ribbon pieces tied to every available branch. Not methodical trail markers, but frantic tangles of synthetic material, as if he'd tried to create a barrier around his campsite. Inside the tent, his journal, camera, and most of his supplies. Outside, a cold fire pit and something that made veteran searchers pause. Kenji's hiking boots sat neatly beside the tent entrance, laces tied, no sign of distress. But leading away from the campsite were bare footprints in the soft earth human-sized, but deeper than any print should be, as if their owner carried impossible weight. The footprints led directly to the forest's most dangerous section, where the ground drops away in hidden ravines masked by undergrowth. The search team followed for 50 meters before the prints simply ended at the edge of a crevasse too deep for their flashlights to illuminate. Kenji's camera revealed 247 photographs from his journey. The first 200 showed beautiful forest scenes, twisted root formations, patterns of light through the canopy. But the final 47 images told a different story. Photo 201, taken at night inside his tent, showing only darkness through the mesh door. But enlarged on computer screens, searchers could make out shapes moving between the trees' tall, pale forms that didn't quite resolve into recognizable shapes. Photo 215, his blue ribbon trail, but with additions. Extra ribbons appeared tied to trees where Kenji swore he hadn't placed them, creating paths that led away from his intended route. Photo 234, a close-up of one such unauthorized ribbon, but the material looked different, older, weathered, though identical in color to his fresh markers. The final photograph, image 247, was taken from inside his tent at 3:17 a.m. Would have been his last night. The camera was pointed at the tent's entrance, which was still zipped shut. But the image showed an impossibly clear view of the forest beyond, as if the tent walls had become transparent. And there, standing just at the edge of the flash's reach, was a figure in hiking clothes, holding a roll of blue ribbon. The figure's face was turned away, but searchers noticed two details that made their blood chill. First, the hiking clothes were identical to Kenji's missing outfit, down to the distinctive patch on the jacket sleeve. Second, the figure was tying ribbons to trees, but the ribbons were leading in all directions simultaneously, creating an impossible maze of blue trails that seemed to fold back on themselves. Kenji Yamamoto was never found, but in the months following his disappearance, other hikers reported strange sightings in Aokigahara's depths. Blue ribbons appearing on trees overnight in areas where no one should have been walking. The sound of someone moving through the undergrowth just beyond sight, always maintaining perfect distance from observers. And once a group of university students camping at the forest's edge claimed to have seen a figure moving between the trees at dawn, methodically tying blue ribbons to branches, while walking in impossible directions, sometimes horizontally along tree trunks, sometimes upside down along the undersides of massive branches. The students reported that the figure never looked in their direction, but they had the unshakable feeling that it knew exactly where they were. And as morning light grew stronger, they realized the figure was creating a trail of blue ribbons that led directly toward their campsite. They packed and fled before the trail could reach them. Search teams continue to find blue ribbons tied to trees in areas where no hiker has officially ventured. The material is always identical to the type Kenji used: synthetic, weatherproof, bright blue. But laboratory analysis shows the ribbons are weathered in ways that should take years, not months. Ranger Tanaka now warns solo hikers about the blue ribbon trails. If you see them, he tells visitors, don't follow them. They don't lead to safety. They lead to someone else's search for the way home. A search that may never end. The official maps of Aokigahara show no human settlements within the forest's boundaries. No villages, no shrines, no permanent structures of any kind exist in the 35 square kilometers of dense woodland. Yet for over 2 centuries, lost travelers have reported finding a village that shouldn't exist. A cluster of traditional buildings that appears when hope dies and vanishes when rescue draws near. The first documented account comes from a samurai named Watanabe Masahiro, who became separated from his traveling party during the winter of 1823. His later testimony to village authorities tells of wandering for 3 days in increasingly desperate circumstances, surviving on snow and pine needles, when the smell of cooking rice led him through the trees to salvation. Through the mist, I saw lanterns glowing warm as summer fireflies, Watanabe wrote. A dozen houses or more, built in the old style with steep thatched roofs and paper windows that glowed golden from within. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and I could hear the laughter of children at play. The village appeared to exist in a small clearing that Watanabe was certain he had passed through multiple times in his wandering. The buildings seemed solid and real weathered wood, darkened by age, gardens where vegetables grew despite the winter cold, a well with a stone rim worn smooth by countless hands drawing water. As Watanabe approached, an elderly man emerged from the largest building. The stranger wore traditional dress that seemed decades out of style, the hakama pants and haori jacket of the late Edo period, though by 1823, such formal clothing was becoming rare in rural areas. The man's face was kind but pale, almost luminous in the lantern light. "Honored traveler," the old man called, "you appear lost and cold. Our village offers shelter and warmth to those who have wandered far from home." Gratefully, Watanabe approached the nearest house. But with each step, the building seemed to shift somehow in his peripheral vision, growing more distant rather than closer. The warm light that had drawn him began to dim, and the laughter of children faded to whispers that might have been wind through the trees. When he finally reached the spot where the village had stood, Watanabe found only empty forest. No buildings, no gardens, no evidence that humans had ever lived in their clearing. Even his own footprints seemed to vanish behind him as he walked, leaving no trace of his passage through what should have been disturbed earth. The story might have been dismissed as a hallucination brought on by hunger and exposure, but similar accounts began to surface with unsettling regularity. In 1887, a merchant named Tokuda reported finding a village of silk weavers whose products seemed to shimmer with unnatural beauty. In 1923, a group of students claimed to have discovered a farming community where the inhabitants wore clothes from the Meiji period, but spoke in the formal court language of centuries past. Each account followed the same pattern. Desperate travelers, usually lost for days, would catch sight of warm lights and human activity in the depths of Aokigahara. The village would appear solid and welcoming from a distance, but would fade like morning mist as the observers drew near. And always, the phantom residents seemed to exist in time periods earlier than the present day, as if the forest preserved echoes of Japan's past. Dr. Emiko Sasaki, a folklore researcher from Waseda University, spent 3 years in the 1990s collecting testimonies about the phantom village. Her findings, published in the Journal of Japanese Supernatural Studies, documented over 40 separate sightings spanning 170 years. The accounts showed remarkable consistency despite coming from witnesses who had no contact with each other. The village appears to manifest most frequently during periods of extreme distress. Dr. Sasaki wrote, "Witnesses are invariably lost, frightened, and at their psychological breaking point. The phenomenon seems to feed on desperation, offering false hope that dissipates upon close approach." But Dr. Sasaki's research uncovered a more disturbing pattern. Historical records showed that the area now covered by Aokigahara had indeed once contained several small settlements. During the Great Famine of 1783, when volcanic ash from Mount Asama poisoned crops across central Japan, entire villages in the region had been abandoned. The residents had either fled to cities or died where they stood, too weak from starvation to continue their struggle for survival. It's possible, Dr. Sasaki theorized, that the phantom village represents a collective memory, the forest's attempt to preserve what was lost. The inhabitants appear to exist in temporal bubbles, continuing their daily lives unaware that centuries have passed and their world has disappeared. Modern paranormal investigators have attempted to document the phantom village using night vision cameras and electromagnetic field detectors. The Aokigahara Research Foundation conducted extensive studies between 2010 and 2015, setting up monitoring equipment in areas where sightings were most commonly reported. Their findings were inconclusive but intriguing. Temperature readings showed unexplained warm spots in specific areas, sometimes maintaining temperatures up to 10 degrees higher than surrounding zones despite no visible heat source. Electromagnetic anomalies spiked at regular intervals, suggesting some form of energy discharge that followed patterns resembling human activity. Stronger readings during what would be typical meal times, weaker during sleeping hours. Most interesting were the audio recordings. Sensitive microphones picked up sounds that resembled human activity, the creak of wooden buildings settling, the splash of water being drawn from wells, the distant murmur of conversation. But voice analysis software couldn't isolate actual words, leading researchers to wonder if they were hearing echoes of the past rather than present-day phenomena. The most compelling recent account comes from Hiroshi Nakamura, a photographer who became lost in Aokigahara while pursuing his art in 2018. After 2 days without food, growing increasingly disoriented and frightened, he claims to have found the village just before dawn. "The buildings looked so real, I could see individual wood grains on the walls," Nakamura reported. Garden plots with neat rows of vegetables, laundry hanging on lines, a temple bell tower rising above the other structures. "I could smell miso soup cooking and hear someone sweeping a porch with a bamboo broom." Nakamura, an experienced photographer, immediately began taking pictures. But his camera malfunctioned, producing only images of empty forest, no matter which direction he aimed the lens. When he lowered the camera to check its settings, the village remained visible to his naked eyes. When he looked through the viewfinder again, he saw only trees and shadows. "I walked toward what looked like the main house," Nakamura continued. "An old woman stood in the doorway, beckoning me forward. She wore a traditional kimono that seemed to glow with its own light. But with each step I took, she became more transparent, and the building behind her grew fainter. By the time I reached the spot where she had stood, there was nothing but a fallen log covered in moss." Nakamura was found by search teams 12 hours later, dehydrated and confused but alive. His camera contained no images of any village, but the memory cards showed something that chilled investigators. The timestamp data revealed gaps periods where the camera had apparently been taking photographs continuously for hours, but no image files were created. The electronic trail suggested Nakamura had been actively photographing something for most of the night, but the forest had refused to be captured on film. Local residents near Aokigahara's borders still warn visitors about the phantom village. "If you see lights in the forest," old-timers advise, "don't trust them. The village offers shelter to the desperate, but shelter isn't what you receive. Those who enter the phantom houses become part of the phantom themselves, trapped in time like insects in amber. Some claim to have seen new faces among the village's residents, modern clothing mixed with traditional dress, as if recent victims had joined the eternal community of the lost. These witnesses describe a gradual realization that the village's inhabitants are not alive in any conventional sense, but are not precisely dead either. They exist in a state of perpetual twilight, forever welcoming new residents to a home that exists only in the spaces between reality and dream. The phantom village of Aokigahara remains unmapped, unreachable, and undeniable. It appears when desperation peaks and vanishes when hope returns, offering salvation that transforms into eternal imprisonment for those desperate enough to accept its hospitality. In a forest known for endings, perhaps it represents the cruelest deception of all the promise of a new beginning that leads only to timeless repetition of the same sorrowful day. In the darkest hours before dawn, when Aokigahara sleeps beneath its canopy of ancient trees, some visitors report seeing something that defies explanation. A blue light that dances between the trunks like captured starfire. Not the harsh glare of flashlights or the warm glow of lanterns, but something otherworldly, a soft, pulsing radiance that seems to breathe with a life of its own. The first recorded sighting dates to 1965, when forest worker Takeshi Mori was conducting early morning wildlife surveys deep in the forest's interior. It appeared about 50 meters ahead. Mori later testified to his supervisors. A blue sphere roughly the size of a child's head, floating 3 feet above the ground. It moved with purpose, weaving between trees as if following a path only it could see. Curious rather than frightened, Mori followed the light for nearly an hour. It maintained perfect distance ahead of him, never allowing him to close the gap, never disappearing entirely. The light seemed aware of his presence, occasionally pausing as if waiting for him to catch up, then resuming its mysterious journey deeper into the forest's heart. I realized I was lost, Mori continued. Completely turned around in sections of forest I'd worked for 15 years. The light had led me far from any marked trail, into areas where the trees grew so thick that daylight barely penetrated. And still it danced ahead, beautiful and terrible, like a fragment of the aurora come to earth. When Mori finally stopped following, exhausted and disoriented, the light paused too. For several minutes, it hovered motionless, and he could swear he felt its attention focused directly on him. Then, without warning, it shot straight up through the canopy and vanished, leaving him alone in darkness, so complete he had to feel his way back to familiar territory by touch. Word of Mori's encounter spread among forest workers, most of whom dismissed it as fatigue-induced hallucination. But similar reports began to accumulate. Night security guards spoke of a blue glow that appeared on their patrol routes. Amateur astronomers camping at the forest's edge described lights that moved too deliberately to be natural phenomena. Even park rangers, trained to identify and explain unusual sightings, began to admit they'd seen something inexplicable wandering Aokigahara's depths. The blue light seemed to follow patterns that defied conventional logic. It appeared most frequently during the new moon phase, when darkness lay heavy on the forest floor. Witnesses described its movement as both random and purposeful, darting erratically through dense undergrowth one moment, following clear paths with determined direction the next. Dr. Kenji Yamada, a paranormal researcher from Tokyo University, organized the first scientific expedition to document the blue light phenomenon in 1987. His team spent 2 weeks in Aokigahara, setting up cameras, electromagnetic sensors, and atmospheric monitoring equipment in areas where sightings were most commonly reported. On their 9th night, the equipment detected the light before human eyes could see it. Temperature sensors registered a localized cooling effect that preceded the visual manifestation by several minutes. Electromagnetic field detectors showed massive spikes in energy that had no identifiable source. Then, at 2:47 a.m., the blue light appeared exactly where the instruments predicted it would manifest. It was beautiful beyond description, Dr. Yamada wrote in his expedition log. Not a simple sphere, but a complex structure of light that seemed to contain depths and layers, like looking into clear water that reflected infinity. It pulsed with a rhythm that reminded me of a sleeping heart, and watching it filled me with simultaneous wonder and dread. The scientific equipment recorded the light for over an hour as it moved through predetermined patterns among the trees. Video footage showed its luminescence intensifying and dimming in regular cycles. Audio recordings captured no sound associated with its movement, yet sensitive microphones detected changes in ambient noise, as if the light absorbed certain frequencies while reflecting others. Most puzzling were the electromagnetic readings. The light generated field distortions identical to those produced by powerful electrical storms, yet the forest remained completely calm. Weather stations detected no atmospheric disturbances, no charged particles in the air, nothing that could explain the massive energy signatures the instruments recorded. But Dr. Yamada's expedition made a discovery that transformed the blue light from curiosity to concern. Following the phenomenon's path the next morning, the team found disturbed earth in areas where the light had passed. Not the scattered leaves and broken twigs, typical of animal passage, but deliberate excavations, small holes dug in the forest floor with surgical precision. The holes were perfectly circular, Dr. Yamada noted, approximately 6 inches in diameter and 2 feet deep. The walls were smooth, as if created by intense heat rather than mechanical tools. And at the bottom of each hole, we found objects, personal effects. A wedding ring embedded in fused earth. Fragments of clothing that seemed to have been subjected to extreme temperatures. A child's toy melted into shapes that hurt to look at directly. Most disturbing were the photographs' images of people who appeared to be screaming, though their faces showed no signs of distress, as if the terror existed in dimensions beyond normal emotional expression. The objects appeared to be offerings or trophies, arranged with care in their underground chambers. Some were clearly old antique jewelry, coins from previous centuries, fragments of traditional clothing that predated modern manufacturing. Others were disturbingly recent cell phones, with screens cracked in patterns that resembled Japanese characters. Hiking boots with treads that showed impossible wear patterns, as if their owners had walked on surfaces that didn't exist in the natural world. Local folklore provided a possible explanation. The blue light matched descriptions of Hitodama spiritual flames associated with departed souls in traditional Japanese belief. But unlike the gentle spirits of ancestors that Hitodama typically represented, the light in Aokigahara seemed to serve a more sinister purpose. In the old stories, explained Grandmother Sato, whose family had lived near the forest for 12 generations, Hitodama appear when souls are trapped between worlds, unable to find peace or resolution. They seek to guide the living toward understanding, toward closure. But this light ... this is different. It doesn't guide toward peace. It collects. Grandmother Sato's words proved prophetic. Over the following decades, reports of the blue light increased in frequency and intensity. Witnesses described it leading them deeper into the forest, always maintaining perfect distance, always just bright enough to follow. Some managed to resist its pull and returned to tell their stories. Others were found days later, wandering aimlessly with no memory of where they'd been or how much time had passed. The most chilling account comes from Yuki Tanaka, a graduate student who encountered the blue light during a camping trip in 2003. It appeared at my campsite around midnight, she recalled, hovering just outside the circle of my fire's glow. Beautiful and mesmerizing, like a piece of sky that had fallen to earth. The light pulsed in patterns that seemed to match her heartbeat, and Yuki found herself walking toward it despite conscious efforts to remain at her campsite. I couldn't stop myself, she explained. My body moved without my permission, drawn by something stronger than fear or logic. The light retreated as I approached, leading me away from safety into the forest's depths. For 3 hours, Yuki followed the blue radiance through paths that seemed to open before them and close behind. The light led her to clearings that shouldn't exist, around trees that defied botanical classification, past rock formations that hurt to observe directly. And always, she felt watched by unseen presences that moved parallel to their journey. I began to understand, Yuki continued, that I wasn't being led somewhere. I was being collected. The light wasn't showing me a destination. It was making me part of its own journey, adding my life force to its endless wandering through the forest. The spell broke when Yuki's cell phone rang, her boyfriend calling to check on her safety. The mundane electronic sound shattered whatever hold the light had maintained over her will, and she found herself standing alone in absolute darkness, miles from her campsite. The blue radiance had vanished, leaving no trace of its presence, except the memory of beauty that felt like betrayal. Search teams found Yuki 12 hours later, dehydrated and disoriented but alive. Her cell phone showed dozens of photographs taken during her missing hours, images of the forest at night that revealed details impossible to capture without artificial light. Trees, paths, clearings, and rock formations all appeared in perfect clarity, as if illuminated by some unseen source. But most troubling were the final photographs on her phone. Images that showed other people walking through the forest, following points of blue light that led in all directions simultaneously. Men, women, children, all ages and time periods represented, all following their individual lights deeper into Aokigahara's embrace. Their faces showed the same expression. Yuki remembered feeling joy mixed with helplessness, wonder corrupted by the growing awareness of trap closing around willing prey. The blue light continues to appear in Aokigahara, reported by visitors who survived their encounters and by monitoring equipment that records phenomena beyond human perception. Park rangers warn campers about lights in the forest, advising them to ignore any illumination that appears unnatural or too beautiful to be real. The blue light offers guidance, Ranger Tanaka explains to visitors. But guidance toward what? In a forest where so many have lost their way permanently, any light that promises to lead you somewhere should be viewed with extreme suspicion. Beauty in Aokigahara is often the mask that danger wears to lure the unwary to their doom. Recent technological advances have allowed researchers to study the blue light phenomenon with greater precision. Infrared cameras reveal that the light exists in spectrums beyond normal human vision, suggesting it may be visible to other senses as well. Acoustic analysis of areas where the light appears shows sound waves that register below the threshold of human hearing, but that affect brain activity in ways that promote feelings of trust and compliance. Most disturbing are the geological surveys conducted in areas of frequent blue light activity. Ground-penetrating radar reveals a network of chambers beneath the forest floor hollow spaces that should exist in the dense volcanic rock that forms Aokigahara's foundation. These chambers appear to be connected by tunnels that follow patterns identical to the paths the blue light takes through the trees above. What lies in those underground spaces remains unknown. Scientific equipment lowered into the chambers records only darkness and silence, but that silence has qualities that suggest occupancy rather than emptiness. Something waits in the depths below Aokigahara, something that sends its blue ambassador above ground to gather what it needs for purposes that remain terrifyingly unclear. The blue light of Aokigahara dances still, beautiful and deadly, offering guidance to those who have lost their way. But the path it illuminates leads always downward, into depths where light itself becomes darkness, and guidance becomes eternal captivity in the forest's most jealously guarded secret. As dawn breaks over Aokigahara, the first light filtering through the canopy reveals a forest that appears peaceful, almost innocent. Morning birds call to each other across the branches, and small animals rustle through the undergrowth, in their eternal search for food and safety. To the casual observer, nothing here suggests the dark reputation that has grown around this place like moss on ancient stone. But silence has weight in Aokigahara, and those who listen carefully can hear the stories trapped within it. This is not simply a forest haunted by tragedy, though tragedy has certainly marked these paths. Nor is it merely a place where folklore and reality blur together, though that blurring occurs with unsettling frequency. Aokigahara represents something more fundamental, a landscape where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds grows thin enough to cross, where the past refuses to remain buried, and where the desperate and the lost find that, even in death, peace remains elusive. The stories we've explored, the curse of the abandoned grandmother, the hiker who marked his trail with blue ribbons, only to vanish along his own path, the phantom village that offers shelter to none who need it most, the blue light that guides travelers toward destinations they never chose. These are more than ghost dailies shared around campfires. They are testimonies to a place that operates by rules different from those that govern the ordinary world. Modern science attempts to explain Aokigahara's phenomena through magnetic anomalies, infrasound effects, and psychological suggestion. The dense basaltic rock beneath the forest floor does create compass deviation. The thick canopy does muffle sound in ways that can disorient visitors. The forest's association with tragedy does create psychological expectations that may manifest as supernatural experiences. But science can only explain so much. It cannot account for the photographs that show figures where none should be, the electromagnetic recordings that suggest organized intelligence behind unexplained phenomena, or the consistent details shared by witnesses who had no contact with each other. At some point, rational explanation reaches its limits, and we must acknowledge that Aokigahara operates according to principles that our understanding has not yet embraced. Perhaps the forest serves as a repository, a place where intense human emotion leaves permanent impressions on the physical world. The grandmother's curse, born from abandonment and betrayal, may have established a spiritual precedent that draws others who carry similar wounds. The missing hiker's desperate attempts to mark his path could have become a template that the forest itself now follows, creating trails that lead everywhere and nowhere. The phantom village might represent a collective longing for community and shelter that has taken on independent existence. The blue light could be the forest's own attempt to understand the human souls it has collected, a luminous intelligence born from accumulated despair and wonder. Or perhaps Aokigahara is simply a place where the veil between worlds has worn thin through centuries of intense human experience, where the accumulated weight of sorrow, desperation, and final moments has created tears in reality itself, where the forest has become a living entity that feeds on human emotion and responds with manifestations, drawn from its vast storehouse of collected experiences. The truth may be unknowable, and perhaps that is as it should be. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, not because they lack answers, but because the answers would change us in ways we are not prepared to handle. Aokigahara keeps its secrets well, sharing only glimpses and fragments with those brave or foolish enough to venture into its depths. But the forest also serves as a reminder of our responsibility to the living. Behind every supernatural tale lies very real human suffering. People who were lost long before they ever entered these trees. Individuals seeking an end to pain that seemed unbearable. The spirits that may wander Aokigahara's paths represent not just supernatural phenomena, but lives cut short, families destroyed, communities that failed to provide the support and connection that might have changed everything. Modern Japan has recognized this responsibility. Crisis intervention signs now mark the forest's official trails. Counselors patrol regularly, trained to recognize and assist those who come here carrying more than hiking supplies. Security cameras monitor main pathways, and rescue teams stand ready to respond when someone loses their way literally or metaphorically. These efforts acknowledge a truth that transcends supernatural speculation. Aokigahara's real power lies not in its ghosts, but in its ability to attract the living who have lost hope. The forest's reputation creates a terrible gravity that draws people from across the world, individuals who believe they have found the perfect place for a final ending. Yet even here, among the twisted roots and ancient trees, endings are not always final. Search teams rescue dozens of visitors each year, some who simply lost their way, others who arrived with darker intentions, but changed their minds when confronted with the reality of their situation. A forest that has witnessed so much despair also bears witness to moments of redemption, to decisions to continue living, to the discovery that even in the darkest places, hope can take root. The stories of Aokigahara remind us that we are surrounded by mysteries we may never fully understand, but they also remind us of our connections to each other and to the natural world. The grandmother's curse speaks to our obligation to care for our elders. The missing hiker's blue ribbons represent our universal desire to find our way home. The phantom village embodies our need for community and belonging. The blue light reflects our attraction to beauty, even when that beauty masks danger. In recognizing these connections, we begin to understand that Aokigahara's supernatural phenomena may be less important than its very human lessons. The forest serves as a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears and most desperate longings back at us in forms that demand attention and respect. As you leave this place, whether physically or through the conclusion of these stories, remember that Aokigahara's influence extends far beyond its geographic boundaries. The questions it raises about life, death, responsibility, and connection follow us back into the everyday world. The silence that carries such weight here reminds us to listen more carefully to the silences in our own lives and in the lives of those around us. Sometimes the most profound hauntings are not supernatural at all, but simply the awareness of opportunities missed, words unspoken, hands not extended to those who needed help. The real ghosts that follow us from Aokigahara are not the spirits of the departed, but the knowledge of what we might have done differently, what we still might do, what connections we still might forge. In Aokigahara, even the trees have stories to tell. The whispers you hear in the wind might be supernatural phenomena, or they might be the forest itself, trying to teach us something essential about the weight of silence, the power of listening, and the importance of ensuring that no one walks alone into the darkness. The sea of trees keeps its mysteries, but it also offers its lessons. In the end, perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is everything. In Aokigahara, even the silence has a voice, if you're willing to hear it.